Hello, fifth graders. Today we are starting our multiplication unit by looking at multiplication patterns and the associative property of multiplication, and we're going to use that to do some estimating of products. This is lesson 4.1.1. What patterns do you see here? We have 4 times 2 ones equals 8. 4 times 2 tens equals 80. 4 times 2 hundreds equals 800. And 4 times 2 thousands equals 8,000. Do you notice that every time we have 4 times 2 and we get 8 of something, notice we get 8 of the something that we are multiplying 4 times 2 by. So 4 times 2 ones gives us 8 ones. 4 times 2 tens gives us 8 tens. 4 times 2 hundreds, 8 hundreds. And 4 times 2 thousands would be 8 thousands. If you notice that pattern, that's going to help you quite a lot when we are working with multiplication patterns today. What we're going to use is something called the associative property of multiplication. It's just a math rule that says that the way the factors are grouped in a multiplication problem does not change the product. For example, if I wanted to find out what 4 times 2 times 10 is, I could multiply the 2 times 10 first, that would be 20, and then multiply that by 4. 4 times 20 would be 80. Or I could multiply the 4 times 2 first. That would be 8. And then multiply that by 10. You see, it's still the same product, 80. So it does not matter which way I group the factors. I'm still going to get the same product. Now let's look and see what's happening when we are actually doing some multiplication and using the associative property. What does 3 times 50 really mean? Well, here, these are the tens rods. So you're probably familiar with the place value rods. These are tens rods. A 50 is really 5 of these tens. Okay, so 5 times 10, we know that's 50. So here's another 5 times 10, that's another 50. Here's another 5 times 10, here's another 50. Okay, so when we're doing 3 times 50, here's what we have. We have 3 groups of 50, right? That's 3 groups of 5 tens. Do you see how I have 3 groups of 5 tens here? Now, here is a multiplication expression that matches this model and will represent the total. Okay, I have 3 groups. There they are, 3 groups of 5 times 10, right? 3 groups, and each group has 5 of those tens. So here's a way we could think about this. 3 times 50, that's 3 times 5 times 10. That's equal to 3 times 5 times 10. Did you notice how I changed the grouping here? I put the 3 times 5 together. Okay, and that is because 3 times 5 is 15. That's one of those lovely multiplication facts that we memorize. And doing 15 times 10, that's a little bit easier for me to do in my head. 15 of those 10s would be 150. 15 of those 10s. All right, let's take another example. This is 4 times 50. What does it really mean when we have 4 times 50? Well, notice now we have 4 of these groups. Now, what are these groups? Well, each group is 5 of those tens rods. So 5 times 10, 5 times 10, 5 times 10, 5 times 10. Okay, what we have is 4 times 5 tens. Now, another way you can think about this is, that's 4 times 5 times 10. But how could I group these factors to make them easier to work with in my head? Well, that's where that associative property comes in. I'm going to regroup them like this. 4 times 50, we know, is 4 times 5 times 10. But for me, it's a lot easier to do the 4 times 5 together. That's a basic math fact, 4 times 5. And then multiply that times 10. I know 4 times 5, that's 20. So now I have 20 times 10. So I have 20 of those 10s. 20 of those 10s, okay? Otherwise known as 200. Here is another problem, and it's just showing you in words and numbers what we've been talking about. This time, though, we have a 2-digit times a 2-digit number, and we're really pulling apart those factors, the 30 and the 80. The 30 is a 3 times 10, and the 80 is an 8 times 10. In other words, we've got 3 10s times 8 10s. Now, here's where that associative property comes in. I'm going to group these differently. I bet you already can see I'm going to group my basic multiplication facts together. So 3 times 10 times 8 times 10, that's equal to 3 times 8 times 10 times 10. And now that makes it a little easier for me to do in my head. If I have my multiplication facts memorized, I know 3 times 8 is 24, and then 10 times 10, that's 100. So 24 times 100, I'm going to have 24 of those hundreds, otherwise known as 2,400. Okay, so we're going to use that associative property to find the products for some problems here. So the first thing I'm going to do when I do 60 times 20 is I'm going to break up that 60 and that 20 into factors. This would be a 6 times 10 times, let's see, my 20 would be a 2 times 10. And as you know, I'm interested in using that associative property to group these factors differently so they're easier to work with in my head. Here's how I'll do it. I'm going to put those basic multiplication facts together. So this would be equal to 6 times 2 times 10 times 10. I know 6 times 2, well, that's 12. I know 10 times 10, that's 100. So 12 times 100, well, that's going to be 12 of those hundreds. Do you notice how I just put 2 zeros on the end to show that I have 12 of those hundreds? Do you see the 2 zeros in 100? Okay, here's my product. Let's try another one. 40 times 50. Okay, I'm going to break apart this 40 into 2 factors. It's a 4 times a 10 times the 50 is a 5 times a 10. Okay, I'm going to move these around. I'm going to group them to make them easier to work with. I'm going for those basic multiplication facts. I want those together. This is equal to 4 times 5 times, all right, we've got 10 times 10. Now this is going to be easier to do in my head. I know 4 times 5 is 20. And 20 times, let's see, 10 times 10, that's 100. So I'd have 20 of those hundreds. 20 of those hundreds. Now, did you notice how the 20 has a 0 here already? I have 20 of those hundreds. So that was part of that basic math fact. 4 times 5 is 20. That 0 was already part of that math fact. Okay. Notice I get 2 more zeros because there are 20 of those hundreds. Okay, so 2,000, that's the same as 20 hundreds. All right, 50 times 800. Okay, this one looks a little more interesting. A 50 That's a 5 times a 10. An 800, that's an 8 times, it's not 8 times 10, is it? 8 times what? Yeah, 8 times 100. All right, I still want to group these factors to make them easier to work with in my head. So that 5 and that 8, those are lovely basic multiplication facts. So I'm going to do 5 times 8, and then I'll multiply that times 10 times 100. Okay, let's see what this one looks like. I know 5 times 8 is 40. I know 10 times 100 is 1,000. Now, if you start to lose track of the zeros on that, look, there's 1, 2, 3 zeros in those two factors here. Okay, notice there are 3 zeros in that 10 times 100 product, right? Okay, so now I'm going to do 40 times 1,000. If I have 40 times 1,000, I have 40 of those thousands. Now, thousands, they'd have how many zeros on that, right? They'd have, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so here's the basic math, that part, the 40. And then the 3 zeros there, that shows they're thousands, right? So 40,000 would be my product. Okay, let's see what else we have. 900 times 300. Now, how would we break 900 into two factors? It'd be a 9 times, a 100. Times, let's see, how about the 300? A 3 times another 100. And that would be equal to just doing the 9 times 3 together times the 100 times 100 together. Okay, let's see. 9 times 3, that's a lovely multiplication fact. That would be 27 times, let's see, 100 times 100. Now, 1 times 1, that's 1. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros in the factors. You see those 4 zeros in the factors? 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros on that part, that product for that part. 100 times 100. That's 10,000 right there. Okay? So what I'm going to be doing is 27 times 10,000. Now notice how many zeros are at the end of 10,000. That's going to be helpful. I have 27 of those 10,000s. Did you notice how I put four zeros after the 27? Okay, that's 27 of those 10,000s, otherwise known as 270,000. Okay, so now that we've got our patterns of multiplication down and we know how to use associative property to do that, we're going to be estimating products. And before we can estimate products, we first need to round our factors. You want to round them to the greatest place value column. So 42, our greatest place value column would be the tens. On 29, also, we're rounding to the nearest 10. All right, so 42 rounded to the nearest 10 would be 40. 29 rounded to the nearest 10 would be 30. Now I'm going to get that estimate. All right, now I'm not going to actually write out all my thinking right now. I'm going to tell you my thinking in my head for associative property, okay? So if we have 40 times 30, what we have is 4 tens times 3 tens, okay? I can do 4 times 3, that'd be 12. And the tens times tens, that's hundreds, right? So I'm getting 12 hundreds. Do you notice how there are 2 zeros in the factors and there are 2 zeros on the end of my product? Notice how the first part of my product is the basic multiplication fact. Okay, so my estimate for this is 1,200 or 1,200. All right, I'm still rounding before I estimate. Okay, so I'm rounding to the greatest place value column. So I'm going to round this to the nearest 10. I'm going to round this to the nearest 10. 95 rounded to the nearest 10. Well, I know it's between 90 and 100, but look to the right. I'm going to that upper value. So 100 times this one, 84, that's going to get rounded to 80. Now I'm ready to do some multiplication here. So, okay. If I were thinking associative property, 100 is a 1 times 100, and 80 is an 8 times 10. Okay, here's my basic math fact. 1 times 8, that would be 8. 100 times a 10, that would be 1,000. I'd have 8,000. Do you notice how there are 1, 2, 3 zeros in the factors? And 1, 2, 3 zeros in the product? And then here's my basic math fact. It's at the beginning of that product. All right. We're coming up with an estimate for 745 times 360, about how much that would be. Now remember, we're going to round to the greatest place value column because we want this to be easy for us to do in our head. Okay, so rounding to the nearest 100 on 745 and rounding to the nearest 100 on 360. Let's see, 745 is between 700 and 800, and you can see I'm going to the lower value, right? When I look to the right, I have less than 5, so this is going down to 700. 360, that's between 300 and 400. Look to the right, I'm going to the higher value. I'm going to 400. Okay, I'm thinking associative property in my head. 700 is a 7 times a 100 times 400 is a 4 times a 100. I'm going to do the 7 times 4 first. That's 28. And then 100 times 100. What's 100 times 100? That's going to be 10,000, right? So we'll get 28 of those 10,000s. Do you notice 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros? 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros. Okay. Now, if I put my comma in, you can see that 28 of those 10,000s, why? That is the number 280,000. That is our product. All right, we have just a few story problems here, and these are all estimates, so we are still estimating. Each day has 24 hours, and there are 365 days in a regular year. About how many hours are there in a year? Okay, so we have 24 hours times 365 days. Now, if I'm estimating, I want to round to the greatest place value column. So I'm rounding to the nearest 10 for 24. That would round to 20. For 365, I'm rounding to the nearest 100. That would round to 400. Now I can do some estimating. Okay, so 20 times 400. Now, remember, 20 is a 2 times 10. 400 is a 4 times a 100. Let's do the 2 times 4 first. Okay, that's where that associative property comes in handy. 2 times 4 is 8. And then the 10 times the 100, well, 10 times 100, that's 1,000, right? So I have 8 of those thousands. Do you see 1, 2, 3 zeros, 1, 2, 3 zeros? Okay. All right, last one. A plumber charges $36 an hour for each hour she works. If she worked 172 hours this month, about how much money did she earn? Well, I hope she earned enough to take a vacation. That sounds like a grueling work schedule for that plumber. All right, so how am I going to estimate this? Well, she did 172 hours, so 172 times, she gets $36 an hour. $36 an hour. Okay, so I need to round to the greatest place value column, right? 172 rounded to the nearest 100 is what I'm going for. That would round to 200. $36 rounded to the nearest 10. Why, that would round to 40. So now I have 200 times 40. Now remember, I'm going to use associative property. I know 200 is a 2 times a 100. And a 40 is a 4 times a 10. I'm just going to do the 2 times the 4 first. Okay, I'm going to use those factors first. 2 times 4, that's 8. Now I'm going to do the 100 times the 10. 100 times 10, that's going to be 1,000. I'm going to get 8,000. Now, notice 1, 2, 3 zeros in the factors, 1, 2, 3 zeros in the product. Now, I'm forgetting something, right? Yeah, you're right. I need to label it. In fact, think back to that last problem. Uh-oh, I forgot to label that one too. So she's earning $8,000 a month. Hey, that's not bad. She probably could take a great vacation with that money. But let's just go back really quickly. What would the label be for this one? About how many hours are there in a year? 8,000 hours. Boy, that's a lot of hours in a year. Well, I hope we all use them well next year. We are finished with this lesson, and have a great day. Bye-bye.